Good evening. Thank you. I was waiting. My name's Jim Hayes, and I'm the Executive Director at the Des Moines Pastoral Counseling Center. And I'm up here to say welcome and thank you for being here. And I want to thank a few people. First of all, Des Moines University in partnering with us for this event, for our desire to kind of think a little bit as a community about boys and men and mental health issues that are specific to that population, but mental health in general and being advocates for that. So thank you to Des Moines U. We are a nonprofit. We've been around since 1972, so we're 47 years old. And if you know the nonprofit world, you know you don't do it with great staff and a great board. So I'd like to, I've seen just a couple of board members, most of them are volunteering out there, so I'd like to thank our board members who are here present. And then the staff as well are out there volunteering. They'll be in here to listen to us as well, but we have about 30 therapists that are there. There's about 40 of us that work at the Des Moines Pastoral Counseling Center. We've been in a variety of locations in Des Moines since we were founded in 1972. So we have prescribers, we have psychologists, social workers, mental health professionals who do good work. And I'm assuming that some of our clients are here in the room and they've helped you along the way. Our mission is to provide understanding, hope, and healing through counseling and education. So I want to give just quick background. You're not here to see me. As a country singer I know has, she's got a song that's called You Don't Know Me, I'm the Opening Act, right? So I got to get out of the way as quickly as possible. But I want to give a little bit of context about how we got here tonight and what we're trying to accomplish. Before I got there, I'm in my third year as the executive director, there were some men on our staff, many of whom are here tonight, who were concerned about what are we going to do about the issues of men and boys and mental health. And there were three issues that they were thinking about. One was workforce development, which is huge for us in Iowa. We are not good with mental health access in Iowa. That's just the truth. And so having quality counselors and keeping quality counselors in our state is a huge priority for us. If you've ever had a family crisis and you can't find a counselor, you know what I'm talking about. And in particular, sometimes we get calls for people, is there a man on your staff that I could talk to? So for whatever reason, for that person, speaking to a male therapist is important to them. And 9 out of 10 people coming out of our grad programs are female, which is great. It's a great thing for our workforce, and we have incredible quality counselors regardless of gender at our place. But are we concerned about that? So that was one issue that we were thinking about. Another one was our brand as the Des Moines Pastoral Counseling Center. I hope a number of you have been to our signature fundraiser, which is called Women Helping Women. It's an incredible event, and it was a bunch of women who got together for a lunch 21 years ago and said, we want to help out girls who can't afford health care or behavioral health care. And they passed a hat and made it possible. This year we had over 600 women at our luncheon and a few men hanging around that really are significant to our budget for the funds that they raise. But it was also like, well, that's how a lot of people in central Iowa know us, is through this incredible fundraiser. So what are we going to do about the guys? So there was the fundraising piece of it and thinking about that as well. But the most important one, and the reason we're here tonight, was education. For ourselves in issues that are specific to men and boys, and then also for the community. How can we help other therapists, and how can we advocate in the community for some of the issues that are specific? I want to just give you a quick thing. One of the things that we did for our own internal education is we worked with something called the Presentation Project, and they had a video called The Mask You Live In. Let me read a little bit from that. This is what inspired us as a staff. It's a hard time to be a boy, and the facts are something that should give all of us pause. Today, boys are more likely to be expelled or kicked out of school than girls. Young men are only 43% of enrollees in post-secondary institutions. Boys are more likely to engage in violent crime, binge drinking, and drugs. Male campus sexual assault is commonplace, and mass shootings involving boys and men have become epidemic in our culture. Jails are packed to the rafters with men, and men commit 79% of all suicides in the United States. The status quo is unacceptable. That is our conversation. what are we going to do about this? Regardless of gender, what are we going to do about this as a society, about mental health in general, but specifically about boys as men, has been the conversation for us. One of the people who's taken a leadership role in this, we have a number of guys in our staff. Some of them are here tonight. I'm thinking the ones that I've seen. I don't want to leave anybody out, but I know like Mark Pepe is here. There's people that started this. Dick Douglas is here. These people have been meeting at 7:30 on Thursday mornings for 3 years to figure out what to do about this. But a person who took a significant lead in this is Dr. Mark Manier, one of our psychologists. Mark was just upset enough about it. He said, I'm going to go raise some money on my own to provide some counseling assistance to boys. And he walked across the state of Iowa with his own personal fundraiser to make that happen. I said, Mark, you have done so much for this. I can think of nobody better to introduce Royce as we do this together as a community. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Mark Manier to introduce Royce.
Thank you, Jim. And thank all of you for being here this evening. This is exciting to have the room full. I also, before I have the privilege of introducing our guest, I want to say a word of appreciation to the Des Moines University and how exciting it is that our center can team up with this great Iowa institution for tonight's event. And I also want to thank the center. Particularly that little task force that's been meeting over the past 3 years since I walked across Iowa. In my efforts to raise both awareness and funds, I was and I'm still struck by two important statistics. The first one is that men are much less likely to reach out for help for their mental health issues. At the center last year in 2018, 3/8 of our clients were male, and that included when you get down to the youngest of children, they're predominantly little boys. So think about how that plays out as little boys become men. And secondly, the more sobering statistic is that men are 3 times, almost 4 times more likely to end their lives by suicide than women. Adding to the fact that they're twice as likely to abuse alcohol, which fuels that kind of despair. So, as Jim says, men are in trouble. And from an early age, boys are socialized to be independent, self-sufficient, tough, don't mess with those weak emotions. And in fact, by adulthood, many men feel permission to express only one emotion, anger, or some might even say rage. Men are also less likely to pay attention to their bodies and what their bodies have to tell them about their emotional experience. So all of that is to say that the center started to have these conversations, and it brings us to tonight in our inaugural attempt to go public about men and boys and mental health. And we were in a meeting about 6 months ago when Mark Pepe, who greeted a lot of you when you walked in tonight, he's one of our new young psychologists, and the only reason I say that is because he seemed to be the one that was willing to dream big. He said, well, why don't we see if we can get a guy like Royce White to come and speak? So tonight I'm very pleased to announce that we found a guy a lot like Royce White. And I say that because as we've gotten more acquainted with him over the recent months, there's a lot more to Royce White than basketball. And you're going to probably discover some of that as well. But I'm up here, not just as a mental health practitioner, but as an Iowa State fan. And you know us Iowa State fans, we follow our athletes that we're endearing and impressive in our following as fans. Royce was an All-American ball player, both in high school and college. He was Mr. Basketball in Minnesota in 2009, 10 years ago. And even then, he was speaking up about what it was like to be a teenager who had been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. Just think of that. His 2011 to 12 season at Iowa State was amazing and arguably perhaps one of the best seasons in Cyclone history as he led the team in all 5 categories. I don't know if you remember that: scoring, rebounding, assists, block shots, and steals. Even then, we watched him gain momentum as a mental health advocate. And I can remember on more than one occasion how impressed I was that he had this transparency about him, this authenticity about him, the courage and the wisdom to talk about his struggle with anxiety as a 21-year-old man. As we follow our athletes, we know Royce was drafted 16th overall selection in the 2012 draft by the Houston Rockets and played some with the Sacramento Kings and continued to become more vocal as a mental health advocate. And think about the organization whose attention he was trying to get, the NBA. Tough, right? His career took off again. In the National Basketball League of Canada, he led the London Lightning to the championship in 2017, was the MVP that year, and the next year led the league in scoring with over 25 points a game. And now, he's a 6'8", 270-pound point guard, right? Who's playing for the enemies. And I don't know if you're following CBS, but this summer, lots of basketball with the Big Three League, the 3-on-3 competitions. He was the first overall draft in this year's league when he was selected by the enemies. And tip-off, I think, for the game in Providence, Rhode Island is noon on Saturday. But here's the thing. Royce White is much more than a professional basketball player. Even a little more glimpse into his life, one can see that he's quite a Renaissance man in many ways, already at the age of 28. Just as he took his physical gifts and wholeheartedly developed them into incredible athletic abilities, he's now become a passionate entrepreneur in a variety of ways, trying to make a difference in the world. Science, technology, engineering, electronics, media, healthcare, including efforts to expand mental health care access and efficiency. I think about our center's emphasis on body, mind, and spirit, and here's a man that's seeking to excel in these life dimensions in his own journey. Tonight, though, we salute his efforts for mental health and how he stepped up and said yes to his opportunity to speak on the national scene, again, both with courage and wisdom, to be one of the current foremost advocates for mental health. And let me just say, before we welcome him, he would welcome you to come up and meet and greet him, take a selfie. If you want an autograph, we've scattered some of these around on the tables. That would be a perfect for him to autograph. Thank you for making a difference in mental health, Royce, and we are glad you're with us tonight.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Wow, what an introduction. First of all, thanks for having me here. It's always great to get back to Iowa. I was here earlier in the year in Storm Lake and Iowa Falls and had a great time meeting with the high school students and some of the community people in those areas of Iowa. And obviously, it's always go Cyclones, but I know there's a lot of other Iowa sports fans in attendance, and I am not avidly a part of the blood feud that you guys have brewing here in Iowa, as I'm from Minnesota, and as long as you're not a Packer or Wisconsin fan, then you're all right with me. And I'm grateful for all of Iowa, seriously. Since I've spoken out about anxiety in public, since I left Iowa State, Iowa has continued to reinforce the stand that I took and been supportive of my goals and my direction. And Iowa's ground zero for my future political candidacy. Thank you, yeah. And I promise not to be a lip service politician, and hopefully you'll experience some of what I'm about after this night. And it's probably going to go long, Jim. I already got that feeling, so I hope not to keep you guys too long, but I honestly think this is the most important conversation we could be having as a society. Mental health is the greatest social issue we face. It's the last frontier. Me and some of my science and tech friends, the futurist, young millennial community that aspires to do really wild things like put us on Mars and, create robots that basically do everything for you. I had a conversation on the phone the other day about wearable devices that can help you with anxiety through breathing, calibration, heart rate, cardiovascular, all techie stuff. And I just pointed out to them that, guys, even if Elon Musk puts us on Mars, we're still going to have a mental health issue, period. Even if he finds a way to fully automate AI and it's safe and whatnot, we're still going to have a mental health issue. So this is the last issue. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, just pre-Iowa State. A small dose about the NBA, because, God, I don't want to be up here just ragging on them. I could do that all night. And then I really, really want to get to questions the same way I did in Storm Lake and Iowa Falls, because I really think that the conversation of mental health is broad. And it has to be, in order for the dialogue to be the best or optimal, it has to be an interaction between me and you guys and actually create a dialogue that is relevant to the people in the audience, not some stock speech that I put together. I could do that, but that's no fun. To start off, I'm 16 years old. I'm at a cabin in the summer in Forest Lake, Minnesota. My friend's parents are gone for the weekend. There's about 8, 9 of us. And we decided to drink a little and smoke a little marijuana. Big mistake, obviously. Any young people in the crowd, my little brother's sitting here, he's 16, big mistake. I ended up having a severe panic attack. First panic attack I'd ever had in my life. And it was very bad. Out-of-body experience completely, vomiting. I remember I had eaten a little bit before we had gone as a rookie drinker and smoker. I at least had the wherewithal to do that. However, I chose macaroni and cheese. And as my panic attack started to come on and I felt the nausea and nervousness and shakiness and cold hands, sweaty and whatnot, I remember getting to the bathroom and the vomit was projectile. The toilet must have been from here to where that podium is, and I hit the toilet from the door. So, I mean, it was out of control. But something happened that night that probably would shape my entire journey. From that night and not having a clue about a lot of things in life at 16 years old, but certainly had no idea about mental health or anxiety or what was going on with my body at the time or any of those things particularly. And something happened that night that would shape my journey. And so I had to call because I had gotten so sick and so scared that I thought I was dying. Just typical panic attack, anxiety, fear. So I thought I was dying, and all of my friends were hammered. So nobody was taking me to the hospital. So I had to do the one thing that nobody wants to have to do in that situation, and that's call a parent. So I forewent calling my mom because I knew that would probably result in some form of corporal punishment. And I elected to call my grandfather, and I knew he was going to be disappointed in me. And when I got on the phone with him, it was really hard to tell him where I was. So I had actually hand the phone to a friend to tell him where I was, and all I kept thinking was like, oh man, he's going to give my friend an earful. By the way, me and this young man, we're still very good friends to this day, and this group of people, we're great friends, and they've all gone on to be successful and things like that. But so he finally found his way to me, basically, and he picked me up, and we had a discussion about him being disappointed and how he had wished that I had made better decisions. But the first and foremost thing was to make sure that I was okay. And that seems really simple, but it's really, the gravity of it can't be overstated. It's like, here I am, an All-American basketball player, everything on the line. Reputation is hugely a part of your trajectory as an athlete, as a young athlete. I had just made a choice that could have potentially resulted in jail time, or maybe if we'd been dumb enough to get in a car and drive, death, or something that would have tarnished my reputation, in a way that wasn't recoverable. And my grandfather's a lifelong athlete. And since I was a young kid, it had always been in our discussions, me and him, for me to really pursue being a professional athlete. He used to always tell people when he introduced me as I was young, running around with him to different tournaments and things like that, my grandson, the doctor says he's probably going to be 6'8", which I ended up being. I never used to believe that when he said it. He's going to be 6'8" shooting guard. And I'm like, I don't know. I feel really short, but I ended up being 6'8" and a point guard. So he was more right than I could have hoped for. But the point is that my athletic career and my reputation meant a lot to him. And in that moment, even though I had made this, this grave choice, or what could have potentially been this grave choice, me being okay was still the foremost important thing at that moment. And so what would take place in the months to come would be I would have panic attacks 3 to 4 times a day, usually one every time at the exact same time of day. Be like right around dusk, like clockwork. I would start to have like heavy chest, sweaty palms, and get kind of dizzy, start with maybe a thought or maybe a skipped heartbeat or something, a flutter. I think the marijuana incident and that panic attack had revved up my alertness, my hypervigilant system. And I was very tuned into my body and the way that my body was feeling on a daily and even hourly, even second basis. It'd be a thought or a feeling or something like that would start this panic to come on. And I was fortunate. To have a mom who forewent the corporal punishment and made herself available to come and drive me on what is called the River Road. For any of you that are familiar with the Twin Cities area, our cities straddle the Mississippi River, and on either side there's just some of the most beautiful land and scenery that we probably have in the Midwest, high bluffs and river and beautiful homes and whatnot. So my mother would make herself available in the evenings to drive me along the River Road, and we'd probably drive sometimes for hours with the window down until I was able to either get in, calm down, fall asleep, or whatnot. So I would have these panic attacks for 3 or 4 times a day, one like clockwork, and during this time, I also had to travel to play in front of Tom Izzo and John Calipari and Roy Williams and Coach K and any other high major college coach you could think of, and some NBA scouts who I didn't even know because they move around like ninjas. And so I was juggling all of that, and during that time, I'm giving you guys this explanation so you can know how this fear of flying came about. So during that, I was just starting to have panic attacks, and I was going to and from flying and things like that. And I was having panic attacks sometimes out of town. I was having panic attacks on the way to the airport, and as a 16-year-old, I actually thought something was wrong with my heart. That was my main anxiety. My main fear was that I had a real physical ailment that nobody had caught from me being younger, from the time I was young, because I was aware that my health care wasn't that great with a single mom who, worked a job to make ends meet. And, when you turn 16, you start to piece that together and you get, panic attacks. You're like, I haven't really had the best checkup. So I was convinced something was wrong with my heart. So as we went to go travel, I'd be like, damn, I hope I don't have a heart attack up in this plane. That'd be awful. Or I hope I don't have one there and have to make it all the way back or not make it back to see my family. Or something like that. So that was kind of the turmoil that I was in at that time at 16 years old, juggling this massive anxiety, massive health fear, as well as an All-American basketball career. Strangely, and this is an important piece I think for later on, is that I was actually able to excel as an All-American basketball player while dealing with that, which I still don't know how I did, to be honest. But yeah, when I got on the court, things seemed to fade away. The anxiety seemed to fade away, and I was able to excel, which most people don't understand. It's probably one of the number one questions I get is, how are you able to play at Hilton Coliseum in front of 17,000 if you have anxiety? Anxiety doesn't work like that. Mental health doesn't work like that. Mental health doesn't work the way we want it to work. It doesn't work the way we think it should work. It works the way it wants to work, and then we're all have to be in adherence to that, with some work we could do to try and shape it, but it does its own thing. So here I am, 16 years old, going through this, 17 years old, still going through this, decided to transfer high schools. And one day I just had enough. I was like, I hadn't been sleeping for months, was dead tired, couldn't take anymore, really. It's just the anxiety had become painful. I don't know if anybody's in here experienced it, but I'm sure you've heard of it. We hear people talk about depression a lot and talk about the pain of depression, but anxiety can be pretty painful. Just from the tenseness of the muscles and the chest and things like that, and the nausea. I remember having real significant nausea and stomach pains and things like that. So I had enough. I was like, all right, this is absurd. So I walked into my school office, the nurse's office, and told her what I had been experiencing, which I had been hiding for quite some time, or not necessarily consciously hiding, just not really saying anything about it. And she looked at me, after 2 minutes of me talking and explaining what was going on. She said, I know exactly what's wrong with you. Come with me. And we stood up and we walked through her office back into another room, and there was this door that had this really eclectic presentation. I don't know, it's just, I remember to this day, it was like settling. It was really warm and comforting. And there was a doctor. There's a doctor's office. Her name was Mary Wilkins. She's a part of the Park Nicollet group. Some of you may be familiar with in Minneapolis, Park Nicollet group. What they had set up is a school-based mental health system where doctors donated their time to the high school so that we could have a physician available on campus. Right? And school-based mental health systems are fast fleeting due to political reasons. Another thing to keep in mind as we move forward into the future is the importance of the political process in this whole mental health conversation and fight. So I was fortunate enough at that time to have a school-based mental health system, did a questionnaire, 5 minutes, anxiety disorder, classic case, gave me 3,000 IUs of vitamin D in my own little bottle to take with me home, because supposedly everybody who lives north of Oklahoma is vitamin D deficient. Seriously. It's funny, but it's like, I think there's some truth to that. And vitamin D is the happy drug, it's mood regulator. So that, I don't know if that helped. Maybe it was placebo, but I certainly believed it helped. And also prescribed me Prozac. And, she was, like I said, one of the most important people in my life to date. And, it seems like a lifetime ago, but it's only been 11 years, since I was 17 in her office. And what she introduced me to that day would set the groundwork for me to advocate and actually see this mental health topic for what it is. And right away, she didn't even hesitate to put me on. She didn't call and ask permission to put me on medication. I maybe shouldn't say this, but she didn't call my mom or anything and ask for permission to put me on medication or anything. She's just like, here you go, we're doing this, and it all worked. It all worked. The first day I was on Prozac, I think I had the best sleep ever. Now, I'm not a big pharma shill or anything, so I'm not pro big pharma or anti. I'm just telling you how my story went. I started to have the best sleep I'd had, which I'd been deprived of, and my panic attacks went way down, and my life changed. We went on that year to go 31-0 for my high school. I went on to be an All-American. My high school career had been completely shifted. I had come through an anxiety to an extent. There's a whole entire U of M conversation in there that I won't bore you guys with. It has nothing really to do with mental health or anxiety per se. A little more on the political side, but for whatever reason, the U of M situation didn't work out, and I ended up at Iowa State. Iowa State, fantastic from the jump. Everything that had to do with mental health, everything that had to do with my comfortability. I was expecting a son when I was arriving at Iowa State. He was able to come, and my kid's mother was able to come and live with me, and we were able to go through the pregnancy here together. My son is actually from Iowa. He was born in Mary Greeley. So we always joke with him about that when people ask him where he's from. We're out of town, and he says Minnesota. It's like, no, you're not. No, you're not. I'm from Minnesota. You're from Iowa, buddy. So, yeah, Iowa State was fantastic. Fred was great. Dr. Shulman, who is the team physician at the time, now is in charge of the entire the athletic department over at Iowa State, was another person who became instrumental in the advocacy that I would engage shortly thereafter. And so this is the part where a little bit about the NBA. So after my season at Iowa State, which some of you may be familiar with, there was conversation midway through about NBA prospect. I was kind of an underdog still even. You know, I had some issues at the U of M, so there's always these character clouds that they like to cast over athletes. It's a racket. But there was doubt still. Even as I had gone through my season and I had this great statistical year and played against some of the best draft prospects in the country. Big 12 is one of the best conferences, so naturally a lot of the best players there had high draft projection. Still I wasn't in that conversation yet. And then once we finally hit the NCAA tournament and we played against UConn, if you remember, we played against Kentucky, and I had big-time games against them, dominant games. As soon as the Kentucky game was over, I remember we had lost, and I was super bummed out, like really, really upset that we had lost, because I really felt like if we had gotten past them, we would have won the national championship. They went on to win the national championship, but I think next they played Indiana. It's like we would have smoked Indiana, and then we got one game left, or 2 games left. I forgot who they played in the championship. I believe it might have been Kansas, who we had beaten twice that year. So I'm like, we could have won that if we had gotten past them. But regardless, I got back to the hotel that night, and I'm getting calls, and Fred and Coach Hoiberg and Matt Abdel-Massey, who was assistant at the time, walk into my hotel room, and they're like, all right, buddy, that's it. You're going to the NBA. And I'm like, whoa, like totally didn't expect it, but that's how fast the basketball world works. That's how fast the phones ring. So from that moment on, there was a conversation that had started about me going to the NBA and primarily how the NBA views anxiety, how the NBA viewed mental health. And how it started was, you hire an agent and he tells you, here's where you're at, here's what I think I can do for you, and pretty much is all the same run-of-the-mill stuff. He has the relationships, which what every group of agents does with the people they've been around for 20 years, and they're going to phone call their way to some type of deal. Mine was Andy Miller, who, looking forward now, was a part of the federal indictment for the NCAA for giving money to players. I didn't take any money, but I should have known something was off about that guy then. But anyway, so, we started having the discussions, and the number one question that came up was about anxiety, obviously. So a little bit back in Sports Illustrated had done a story, and ESPN had done a story about me while I was still at Iowa State about anxiety, which I had disclosed completely accidentally. I was doing the interview with ESPN, a guy named Myron Metcalf, who was from Minnesota, coincidentally, and he asked me about my pregame rituals. And he was like, well, what do you do? Do you eat before the game? You eat a special meal? And I was like, I don't eat before games. He was like, well, is that like something you never do, or why? Why don't you do that? I said, I have anxiety. My stomach's nervous the day before games in the mornings. And he's like, what? Wait, hold on. Rewind. What are you saying? It's like, yeah, I have anxiety. I don't eat. And I guess that was a big deal. From there, like, they printed that in that ESPN article, and from there, the whole Royce anxiety flying, there were no other college athletes talking about that at the time. There were no other professional athletes talking about that at the time. I had no idea that was going to be that kind of a story. And it would just follow me from that point on in the draft process. So when I got the draft process, basically what happens is they fly you around each team. They work you out with a group of 6 people. They make it seem like they're making some super expert analysis of your basketball game. And they're just waiting to pull you into this interview room and just, front load all these weaponized questions. It's seriously like that. I'm not exaggerating. It's seriously like just a crazy prodding process of interview questions. Well, naturally, I would become a public speaker, so talking really didn't bother me any. And what they wanted to more so know about is anxiety, which I had limited knowledge of at the time. You know, it was like, I had just been diagnosed at 17. I was only 20, right? I was like, okay, I'll tell you everything I know. And, you know, through the process, what I started to discover was that there wasn't just an ignorance towards mental health. There was a contempt. There was a real contempt for the mental health conversation. To give you an example, I was in Miami, and just a side note, I walk into Miami and, you know, we come into the gym, we're putting our shoes on and whatnot, and it's like Pat Riley, Tim Hardaway, Alonzo Mourning sitting front center, and my hands go icicle cold. I literally look down and I could see the blue in my fingers. I'm like, whoa, it's Pat Riley. I mean, you know, it's Pat Riley, right? It's Pat Riley. I know a lot of you guys have a special place for Fred. So do I. But Pat Riley is like on the pantheon for basketball. So, you know, I was already nervous going into Miami because of just the people that were there. It was probably one of my first workouts too, so I was still shaking the whole I'm about to go on an NBA audition, you know, nerves. So we get done with the workout, went well. My workout partner was Draymond Green, by the way. Special character. And so we get back to the interview room, and they're asking me the regular run-of-the-mill questions, same ones that I had from the combine, which is, you know, at the combine, they actually do a round-robin interview. A lot like 5 hours, and you just go 30 minutes with any team that's interested in you. So it ends up being like 10 teams for 30 minutes. So that was interesting. It was like rapid-fire mental health. It's like mental health in 15 minutes. It's like, all right, guys, I'll do my best. So anyway, I'm in Miami, and they're asking me the same run-of-the-mill questions, and then they ask me about traveling. And this is where, like, my relationship with the NBA really started to splinter. Now, the public wouldn't see it splinter until 3 months later after I was drafted, but this is where it really started to become tense. I'm in there, and they ask me about traveling, and they're like, you know, we hear that you drove to a couple games. I was, yeah, I drove to Kansas State. It's about a 6-hour drive to Manhattan, and then the following week, I drove to Columbia because Fred Hoiberg's superstitious, and we won when I went to Manhattan. And he brought me in the office afterward when we got back, and he said, listen, big fella, you're driving to the next game, too. I ended up driving the NCAA tournament after that, too. There was only like 2 games left in the season. So we all drove to Kansas City. You know, Iowa State, we drive to the Big 12 tournament because it's so close. And then after the Big 12 tournament was the NCAA tournament. So I ended up driving from, you know, Kansas State on. So it was like 3 or 4 games. So I'm in here, and somehow they caught wind of that, and the guy asked me. I had no clue who he was. He wasn't Pat Riley, I'll tell you that. And he wasn't Tim Hardaway. I had no clue who he was. And he was like, you know, we hear you drove to some games. And I said, yeah, I did. They actually went pretty well. Yeah, the reason you guys have me here and are interested is because I drove to the game. And he was like, well, if you came here, we wouldn't even let you drive to Orlando. It's like, what does that mean? I didn't even understand that at the time. I understand it now, and I'll get to that later, but I had no clue what he was talking about at the time. But it felt abrasive, though. It felt really aggressive. You know, we wouldn't let you drive to Orlando. I'm thinking in my head, like, I believe Orlando's about a 5-hour drive. So you're telling me that you wouldn't let me drive preemptively for what reason? If I just told you that when I did drive, I played well, and you've obviously talked to Fred Hoiberg because he used to be a GM, so it's not like you guys don't all know each other. I'm sure he told you that when I drove, I played well, so what is this about? And well, it was about power. It was about power. And it's strange somewhat, but not so much, that the mental health conversation in its practical application, in its boots on the ground interaction between individuals, primarily individuals and institutions or corporations, would, you know, delineate into a power conversation. that was my first taste of it. And when I got back from that interview, I called my agent, the crook, and I said, listen, I'm no longer going to go and visit any team and give them a seminar on mental health. Because number one, I'm not qualified. It's number one. And number two, it actually makes me anxious to have to get on a plane to fly all the way there just to talk about that. So it's like, I don't need to go through that. If they want to do that, we could just talk on the phone, right? So we shut down my workouts, actually. People don't know that. We actually shut down my workouts. And leading up to the draft, then, there was this huge mystery about where I would be drafted. I actually had an article in Sports Illustrated where they called me the mystery pick for a number of reasons, because, hyper-talented, skilled foremen like Draymond Green weren't a thing yet. That position, that four-man position that's now coveted in the NBA, wasn't even a reality yet. They were still calling us tweeners. It's like you're kind of this in-between space, and we don't know what position you play. Now everybody's trying to find an in-between player who can do a little bit of everything. So that didn't exist yet. So that, plus I had only played 1 year, and mainly because of the anxiety story or the anxiety narrative. So going into draft night, I had no clue where I'd be drafted. No clue whatsoever. It was like, probably not going to be drafted at all. The one good thing that came from the draft night was that we donated all the proceeds to the Orchard Place. I'm sure some of you may be familiar with. And had a good relationship with them and Dr. Dudney and those people over there. So that was good. And in my opinion, if that was the only thing that happened that night, that would have been good enough. I could have went undrafted, and I was happy that we had partnered with the Orchard Place to have that event and have my draft night be a part of that. So I ended up getting drafted, and we were on another roller coaster. I was in the belief that, hey, this team must understand what's going on. They've done their research. I had a private investigator come and sit with me for 2.5 hours in Ames, Iowa, at Hy-Vee. He calls me up at 8 in the morning. He's like, hey, listen, I'm a private investigator. I work for some teams that may be interested in you. And just to give you guys some context of just who I am and how I think about things in retrospect, what the hell was that? Just like, even from a mental health standpoint, it's like, okay, so had I just said, no, I don't know who you are, you're cold calling me in the morning and asking me to come meet with you and answer any question you have, no. That would have been used against me. That would have been used against me. So already we're seeing how there's a double-edged sword when it comes to transparency. They're asking me to be fully transparent with them, but he wouldn't tell me what teams he worked for. And then when I got to the league and was transparent with them, they didn't really want to accept it. Just showing you the dynamic early on. Little subtle things that the public would never know about. And you guys all watch people be drafted every year, and you never know there's these private eyes running around grilling people for 3 hours at local breakfast spots, So I had no idea what would happen with the Houston Rockets, but I believed that it was going to be, a good situation. Kevin McHale, he's from Minnesota, legend, icon, Hall of Famer. And when I got there, things were cordial. They were cordial. But I had a sense. I'd been around, enough situations in my life and been around enough people. The marijuana had kicked my hypervigilance in, so I was tuned in. I was a little bit extra tuned in, and I could sense that something wasn't really right. So as we got closer to the season, we have a thing called the Rookie Transition Program, which is basically a seminar where they fly you in to Hoboken. It's like Hoboken, New Jersey. Nobody goes to Jersey. That might be the start of the issue, is just get the transition program out of Jersey. They fly you in and they basically give you all these seminars about people don't let people steal your money. Women are evil, they're after you. Your family you can't trust. Your agent you can't trust, but you have to for now. If you have a problem with him, give us a call. You can't really trust us either. It's just a what of you can't trust anything. You're isolated. But we're trying to make you not feel isolated by telling you. It's a strange event. Anyway, I heard Chris Herron speak there. Some of you may be familiar with Chris Herron, maybe not. He went to St. John's University, and he struggled with heroin addiction. Infamously wrote a book. It was one of the most powerful presentations I'd ever seen at the time. I was like, everybody was just silent in there. You know, young players young players that are fidgety. You know, we're young, just got drafted to the NBA. We have a little bit of money. We have plans and things we're trying to do, and it's not much to do in Jersey, but we're all can't wait till the day's over to get to New York City. And he had us locked in. He had us locked in. And I remember sitting there and just thinking that a lot of what he was describing with his heroin addiction and his struggle and his wife and his kids and the uncertainty and the darkness and the fear, and that sounded very similar to what I had dealt with anxiety. Minus the drug, obviously, but just the nature of it sounded so similar. And I started to think to myself, well, why is there no mental health seminars? So me being the strange individual that I am, I went back to my hotel room later that night when the whole seminar was over. We're scheduled to leave the next morning. And I spent the entire night reading the entire collective bargaining agreement, which I guess no player does. It's strange. No player does that. Later on, I would realize that me reading the collective bargaining agreement was actually the turning point of the entire situation. It would become the turning point for how the sports world really views mental health or talks about it today. Just me reading through this document that these players never read through because their agents just do it for them. And what I would find in the collective bargaining agreement was that there wasn't a single paragraph, sentence, or even mentioning of mental health in the entire document. I was like, uh-oh, this is bad. This is bad. In my back of my mind, I'm thinking there must be an addendum laying somewhere. There must be some document that I'm not seeing, some one-sheeter that's supposed to be attached to the back that they left out for HIPAA reasons. Or I don't know. There's something going on here. And that wasn't the case. There really just was no mental health culture. There was no mental health anything. And so I reached out to the general manager as we approached the season and said, we should probably have a discussion about what we're going to do going forward. What we're going to do. Because I actually have an anxiety disorder, diagnosed, on medication. I'm looking at this list of banned substances, and I see benzodiazepines there, and I'm not sure if it being there with cocaine means that there's a general view that benzos are considered a character flaw, like the cocaine is. There's no language to parse the two. And I just came from an interview process where all of these general managers and scouts are asking me questions, so clearly there's no general awareness or information about mental health in this league. So given that, I'm pretty confident that this benzo cocaine line is going to be gerrymandered when the time comes, when needed. It's going to be weaponized. And not only that, but shortly after, it would be weaponized. So I went to the GM. I said, what are we going to do? He's like, who are you to question anything? You focus on basketball. You don't worry about our policies, I said, no, you're not understanding. I just talked to Mary Wilkins, who is like, Cardinal Richelieu. You guys know who Cardinal Richelieu is? It's like, this Mary Wilkins is Cardinal Richelieu to me. And she just said, if you guys don't come up with a plan of policies, then I need to not play. Because she can see where this is going. She was sitting from afar, and she pegged that out. I had no clue what she was doing at the time. You could, in retrospect, it's just kind of came to me, Jeff. I didn't mention this in Iowa State. I think Mary Wilkins is behind this whole thing. Now that I look back on it, she may be behind this entire little political movement. I had no clue what she was doing, but she was like, yeah, if they're not going to have a conversation transparently about mental health or what they plan to do in regards to you and your contract or their view, then you need to not play. And that's what I relayed. And they went right to the media and said, if Royce White is too anxious to play, he's scared to fly, he's barricaded in his house, he won't come to practice. It's like, uh-oh. No, guys, here we go. No. What I said to you is that general managers and people who went to school for business, specifically sports business usually, are in no way qualified to oversee mental health operation. It'd be like allowing my florist to come and fix my television. It's like, or nothing against florists. The same thing as letting my electrician arrange my bouquet or the arrangements for my wedding. It's just illogical. And so we had a big falling out. And to make a long story very short, through months and months of fighting with them on and off behind closed doors about, what the attitude was, it came down to one simple thing. The mental health conversation for them was a liability that they didn't want to put on paper. The language of the legal world, which is the backdrop of the business world, had a completely different view or a completely different set of attitudes and morals and ethics than the medical world and the health world and the strive for wellness. And their MO was to protect their liability. Not only in terms of, worst case scenario with a player or something like that, but just even in the simplest terms of a player potentially faking a mental illness and still being able to be paid. I'm sure all of you are aware of this, but NBA contracts are fully guaranteed. So there's always issues about, players faking physical injuries or questions about players faking physical injuries, but they still have to be paid once you sign on the dotted line. So to them, there was this whole can of worms that could be opened that if a player, if there was an official mental health policy that acknowledged simple things like anxiety disorder, PTSD, that players would then be able to choose when they could and couldn't play and still need to be paid. What I told them is that's woo-woo. That's a crock of BS. There's no way that you could justify leaving out an entire piece of the main component of overall health based on the fear that one outlier or a few outlier players will malinger, the mental health piece. And when it came right down to it, they looked at me and said, you know what? You're right. You make a good point. You're young, you're smart, you're articulate. You could do a lot for this conversation. You just need to play first. You play, get your money, become an all-star, build your platform, and then we'll help you put a mental health policy in. It was like, so really? Is that the plan? It's funny because they tried to play on, it's like one of those compliments that's intended to be weaponized. Like they thought I was so arrogant that I would actually believe that somebody hadn't come before me and said the same thing. Like what I was saying was first or profound. And they were going to then use that to go, no, we've never heard this before. This is a hot take. You just do these things and then we'll meet you in the middle on that. It's like, no. There are a few doctors now that have actually informed me that they brought the mental health conversation to you in the 80s and 90s when you guys had the drug and alcohol cleanup from the drug wave that was part of a countrywide epidemic. And there was a conversation that needed to be had then about mental health, and you guys forewent that conversation. So you're not going to trick me into thinking that this conversation is going to come about in any other way than me taking a hard stand. So the hard stand is, if you guys don't acknowledge mental health conversation, we're going to have it out, and we're going to have it out right now, right here, in front of anybody that's watching. And I've been blackballed ever since. And here I am, speaking every day, monthly, weekly, to different crowds, and telling them that story. And I think the importance of that story is a few things. Number one, the mental health conversation is about individuals and individual courage. And if we're really going to change the mental health conversation, we have to find individual courage, not to overcome your fears and anxieties or your depressions, not to be able to strive in your isolation in your own individual world, because that's the common epithet. Is that find the courage to overcome what you're dealing with. No. Find the courage to demand that people become more logical and actually have the will to help one another. That's the courage we have to find. And that's what I saw clearly. I had no clue that Mary Wilkins was using me as a device, a little political device, but I could deduce that, at least, as like, hey, this is the common denominator here. There's no doubt about it. Mental health is another way of saying the human condition. People can try and gerrymander the clinical terms all they want to, or talk about who's going to pay for what. That's all well and good, and we can sort that out. But the reality is that the human condition is what the alarm is right now. The human condition is what's knocking at our door. And it's been that way for a long time. It's just reaching an apex, probably, but it's been that way for a long time. What does it mean to be human? How do you deal with it? We're all gonna die, that's scary. Angst, despair, stress, fear, etc. How do you cope? Drugs, alcohol, healthy ways, what is it? How are your relationships affected? How is your general health affected? What are you eating? Are you sleeping? Do you drink enough water in a day? Do you have any vitamin D in your diet? It's the human condition, right? And they basically approached it like, hey, we don't really care about the human condition. We're not here for that. We're a business. We're a business. And that made me double down and go, okay, that's the issue then. The issue is there's a huge roadblock between business and the attitude of a global corporate community and individuals that are trying to navigate life and live in a way that's prosperous and thrive. So that's my story in short. I'm in the big three and played in Canada. Companies, woo-woo, all woo-woo, just stuff that I'm doing. Wrote a few books, writing one to LeBron James right now. It's almost finished, and we go into depth about a lot of these people, because they sit around him. I don't know if you guys know, you probably won't. Read the book when it comes out. That's not a shameless plug, I promise. Matter of fact, the book's gonna be free and available online, just so you know I'm not trying to sell you a bill of goods. But there is a very sneaky maneuver going on with the mass media and sports. It's totally an aside, still connected to the mental health conversation, but an aside for the liberal media to prop up certain individuals within the Black community as true activists when they aren't. And they have used it. I talked about this in Storm, Iowa. They have used the race conversation and weaponized it to stagnate the Black community. LeBron James is really no idol, and he's no activist. As I said in Storm Lake, if you say something that 50% of the country already agrees with, it's not profound. It's safe. It's safe. What I said, nobody agreed with, except you guys probably in this room. You physicians and people who were in the knowing, you guys agreed, but we were by no means the majority in 2012. So, yeah, that book's coming soon. And, ultimately, there's a fight coming. There's a fight coming. I'm not trying to fearmonger, but there's a real fight coming in regards to the corporate world and their designs on how to shape society. And if there's one thing I could say is just find the courage. Find the courage to take a stand individually, and to be able to communicate. So it's transparency, honesty. These ideas aren't profound. They aren't profound. They're biblical. I know and I talked about this in Storm Lake and Iowa Falls, there's a radical abandonment of God and religion. That's why I love that it's, mind, body, and spirit. There's a radical abnegation of God and spirit. But there's a fight coming. And it goes beyond this world, that's for sure. So, we all have to find the courage to be able to take a stand individually. And so that's what my story is about. I'm opening it up for questions. I definitely want to get the dialogue going. Conversation gets better as we ask questions usually. So thank you guys for, hearing my story for a little bit.
Thanks, Royce. He agreed to do some questions for us, and then also, as Mark, as Dr. Munir said at the beginning, glad to stick around for some pictures or autographs too. So, if
How
there
much
are
time
any,
did that take up? Is it 30 minutes maybe? We got time. We got a lot of time, right?
did you talk for 30 minutes?
How long was that?
2 hours.
Oh,
No, I'm kidding. I'm
Oh,
kidding.
God.
No, you're good. You're good. Go ahead.
All right.
I really appreciate your time. I'm a mother of adopted twin girls who have schizophrenia and are 23 today. And my proudest moment is that they are self-sufficient, and one is in culinary school, married, and the other one just got her driver's license. I had the same battle that you had with the medical community and the insurance community, spending over $1 million. Today I work, I'm broke because of it. But the pride that I have is in where my children are today. I left Iowa to go and find success for them and spent that money outside of Iowa. That infuriates me. I was an advocate. I've never been an advocate as I have been for them as a single mother. Means gave me access. And I work in rural America now with men. And I think that it's really important. It's really hard to describe. Your mother would understand, and I don't know how many people in this community have understood or have been a part of, an anxiety moment, because it happens on the flip of a coin. And when it's a child and they don't know how to describe something, or you don't know how to say to them, do you have voices in your head? What's going on? And you don't have any experience with the illnesses at all. I think that what I would love to hear from you is how you could feel it coming on prior to medications, and how long it took you to work through the medications to be able to conquer that, because there are a lot of young people. I don't know how you were received in the high schools, but I'd be very interested in understanding that.
Well, when I was in Storm Lake and Iowa Falls early in the year, speaking to the high schoolers, this is a tough line. I think it's a gray line, because I had a hyper unique situation. I was the most popular kid in high school in the state of Minnesota. You know what I mean? So I didn't have a normal dynamic with the people around me. I was a natural leader. People went the way I went, kind of. And when I was diagnosed with anxiety, or even when I started to deal with anxiety, me talking about it with my friends, although they may have had bad information or judged me, they never did it out loud. And they never bullied. That was out of the question. I was this big at that age. So I had a unique situation in that regard. So it's hard for me to really speak to the bullying element, although I know it's there. You know, I have enough sense to know that is a real issue. As far as the way that it felt coming on, I mean, there were just moments where it felt abnormal. It felt, the word crazy just comes to mind. And that was the word that came to mind when I was that age. It's like, I'm going crazy. That's it. And there was a fear that I was going crazy. And there was actually these moments where I had like this mad rush to try and remember everything that I knew right then, out of fear that moments later I would totally break from reality and no longer know who I was, which, I mean, is just an insurmountable amount of anxiety, which was probably what catalyzed me to walk into the office. And it's probably why I wasn't sleeping, and, you know, pushed me to walk into the school nurse office like, I need a different type of help. And the medication worked right away. So again, I was, hyper unique in that way. I didn't need a dose adjustment. It was like 20 milligrams, boom, solid. Lucky. Yeah, astronomically lucky. Yeah. I mean, we all know that there are people who die from dosage being, that whole trial and error process. So I was like radically lucky. So, I mean, I don't know if that answers your question, but.
It's a part of it, but I think that it's a part of it. But I thank you. And especially big issues is, and on 15 medications.
Yeah.
And I asked to have her blood checked There are offices that won't accept us anymore. Because I don't think the doctors know enough and have enough time. And I go down to Mayo Clinic in Florida and poof, we're done. We're in, doctors call you back.
Yeah, this ultimately, I think that obviously there's an access to care problem, and it's just reflective of a much bigger political issue of the general access to health care. And you can't stress. I hate to make things political, but you can't stress enough how much voting is going to play out in people in the suicide rate. I don't know. Jeff, how was Storm Lake? Yeah, no, the high schooler was great. They were great. They asked great questions. They were engaging. It was incredible. Yeah.
We got another one over here.
Allison's got a question here.
It's okay.
Thank you.
So I'm a medical student here at DMU. Before coming here, my research looked at the NFL and specifically Colin Kaepernick.
Right.
And you mentioned a few things that I think resonate a lot with how we transcend leagues about a lot of similar political issues that are happening with blackballing, with the conversation about who are you to speak about this, who are you to question this.
Yep.
And I think what that ties down to a lot is the question of, not the question, but the dynamic in that leagues value bodies rather than the people that are able to accomplish those physical tasks that we ask of them, right? And so coming from, like with Colin Kaepernick, we talk a lot about his political stance, but what we don't talk about is how the disconnect between what your body is capable of and what you're experiencing exacerbates other mental health concerns or any kind of mental health that you're experiencing, right?
Huge blind spot. Yep.
Yeah. And so my question is, and I think this is a new conversation that Colin Kaepernick and what that has led the way with hasn't really addressed yet, of on a more individual level. How does, and again, I know you said you didn't want to rag on the league, which is perfectly understandable, but being valued for what you can do with your body versus what you experience in your world contribute to your mental health.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna confuse you right now, because I get that narrative. It was one of the first ones I came across. Just like, you guys don't care about the players as people. It's like, well, the answer is pretty plain and simply no, they don't. The question is why, and it's not a simple answer. But first, I want to double back to Colin Kaepernick. Then I'll get to that. I have a great deal of respect for Colin Kaepernick. It takes a lot to be able to stand on your own and speak out against anything. That's just factual. I don't care what side of the line you're on politically, right, left, and it doesn't matter. To stand alone and speak out on something in the way he did physically. He physically stood alone. Not that there wasn't an entire population or sub-political category of this country that agrees with his stance. He physically had to stand alone in that community, and that takes courage. I'm skeptical of Colin Kaepernick. Very, very skeptical for a number of reasons. But as I watched the situation unfold, it dawned on me that Dr. Amalu, well, wait a second. The ethos of the Colin Kaepernick stance is that there is a black injustice in the country, and that by way of the NFL, the black injustice is not acknowledged, it's not taken seriously, and that even mocked in a way, where these players are made to stand and acknowledge the flag and pretend like America is something that it isn't, right? That's pretty much his stance. We agree on that, pretty much. Dr. Amalu came forward with the concussion science the year after I came into the league, maybe. That became prominent, the concussion piece. As a matter of fact, my agent helped the NBA put a concussion policy in place with Carlos Delfino the year before I got drafted. So it was right around that time. And it dawned on me that if there was a conversation to be had about race, indifference towards humanity, and things of that nature, that all of those players would have done well to kneel on behalf of Dr. Amalu, and nobody did. And not only was he scientifically accurate, the race element was there too, because he was an African doctor. And he was ostracized, threatened. I don't know if any of you know the story, seen the movie. He was attacked. He was attacked for bringing forward a perfectly valid field of science. And as I look deeper into it with Colin Kaepernick, I'm like, even the timing that you chose to speak out is conspicuous. You go back, it's like Trayvon Martin was 2012. After that, the Black Lives Matter thing was on. So why, once you get benched, now it's time to advocate? It's only after he got benched that he started to kneel. And again, remember, I started off by saying that regardless of when he chose it, it was the ethos of it is proper, it's true, and it took a lot of courage. But the individual motive in it concerns me, and I don't believe that those type of individual motives, that convenient form of protest or advocacy is what's needed to move the world forward. I think the inconvenient advocacy is what's needed to move the world forward, you know, and thank you, yeah, thank you. And so to circle back to your question about the bodies piece, that's the narrative that they want to tell. They want to ride that narrative. LeBron, Kaepernick, Serena, you know, other athletes too, Aaron Rodgers, whoever, you take your pick. Whoever the liberal faces are, and I'm apolitical. Jeff knows I'm going to speak it true on both sides as best I can. The bodies piece, of course, it's like, but here's the catch, is that the mental health conversation uncovers a deeper disconnect, because we know in the medical community, many of us in here know that even if you have a human commodity business, when humans feel better, they perform better. If they perform better, you make more money off of them. There's a higher production value. So then how can we justify that you actually don't tend to their humanity if the premise is that capitalists are always going to look after the bottom line? Not here. Not here. And I think that has something to do with race. I think that has something to do with race. And not to play on a liberal card, but if you go back to slavery, there was an idea that you could actually torment the workers into being productive enough to yield what you needed to yield, but at the same time, never giving them enough humanity for them to feel human. And so that's the power dynamic I was talking about earlier. It's not about the dollars and cents. That's a show. That's smoke and mirrors. Because if it was about dollars and cents, you would always say, how can I get you, and you to work as best as possible, be as efficient as possible? Obviously, mental health. Obviously, we're not going to put you on Percocet. Your body's going to break down in the end. Obviously, there's a running back issue in the NFL where to give you even a better example, and I was told this like 3 weeks ago, I'm sitting there with Jeff Quanitz, who is Ice Cube's partners with Mark Garagos, who represented Colin Kaepernick. And we're sitting there talking about the NFL case, the collusion case. And I'm like, why the hell did you guys go for collusion anyway? It's like collusion's so hard to prove. We're sitting in the hotel lobby just talking about this collusion case. It's funny. But I'm like, why did you guys go for collusion anyway? And he was like, we knew there was a smoking gun in there. I couldn't go for a collusion case because the mental health conversation is so nuanced that there's no way that there's a thread of emails laying somewhere like, keep that kid out. They found that with the Colin Kaepernick case. Like, our core audience is the Bible Belt. They don't appreciate this. And as such, that monkey ain't playing. And that's why they settled, period. They found that smoking gun. But what was even more interesting is that in their discovery, there was an argument between the union and the NFL to replace all of the AstroTurf with natural grass. This is what happens in discovery. This is why people settle, because these motions of discovery get pretty wild, and it's some weird off thing that had nothing to do with the case that ends up really showing some stuff. So there was an opportunity to replace the turf with natural grass. And there was all these scientific studies that had showed that the natural grass was much softer on the body, and the union even brought up like, well, your running backs are gonna last longer. And the owners said no, just because they didn't want to cede any position to the union. So the player's body became a proxy war of the power struggle between the union and the league owners. Had nothing to do with the players. So that's, when you say the body stings, it goes way deeper than oh, you can just play. It's like, it's a proxy ground. It's just a power struggle, you know? And it's a continual one. It's about pride and ego, which ironically circles back to being a mental health conversation. When you're so insecure that your dominion over other people that are presumably underneath you is the only way that you feel alive or any sense of true identity. When power becomes your identity, it's like, yeah, so there's that.
Maybe try and do one or two more if you've got a question. Mark, keep going. I'll be right there. Mark's got one first.
Thank you. I'm actually going to be the new high school vice principal at Storm Lake, so I'm excited that you were up there as well.
Nice.
You mentioned at your high school and even things at Iowa State, and I'm seeing the hashtag Make It Okay. So just talk to me, like you mentioned how that door was so welcoming and different things Iowa State did. So in a school setting, how can we just continue to make and end that stigma so students feel okay to take that risk?
I'm going to say something way off brand here. It's not that I haven't been doing that already. I have a problem with this. I have a problem with this mental health term. For a number of reasons, I struggle with, because I've been in these positions and in these rooms with these people who make these decisions, I see constantly that word, that term is used to gerrymander conversations about the human condition. And essentially, there's a cultural attitude that seeks to separate many different categories of people and place them in many different boxes for us to be able to compartmentalize and identify with them, whether it's me with anxiety or troops with PTSD or women who have been in abusive relationships with PTSD or eating disorders or whatever the case may be. And we've created these mountains of clinical terms. And the DSM is longer than the Bible. It's not, but I'm just saying, it's pretty lofty. And I think it overlooks the fact that most people don't have that language. And so the language of the psychological world has led our cultural attitudes towards the mental health conversation. Even the term mental health is a part of that outline. And I mean, how do kids even start to wrestle with mental health? I hear this, and to go further, I hear this all the time, that there's a stigma, right? There's a stigma around mental health and people not wanting to ask for help. And we laid out the stats earlier about men and boys being less likely to ask for help. I hear it, I don't agree. I don't agree with those stats. I think men and boys are asking for help all the time. They're just not using the language that we're used to or familiar with. They're lashing out. They're going into seclusion. They're not coming to school and going, I'm having panic attacks. They're not coming to school and saying, I am a drug addict, because nobody does that. Who does that? And are we as a community and society really waiting for our 15, 14, 13, 10-year-old? I looked, there was a 10-year-old boy committed suicide. Are we really waiting for them to show up at school and have the terminology that they need to communicate properly? No. Break the mental health wall down. Every single person in this room, every single person that walks into the high school has a mental health. It needs to be checked in on daily. It needs to be adhered to daily. There needs to be spaces created for it to heal, thrive, communicate daily, and it needs to be creative. And that's what I said in Storm Lake. Thank you. It's a new time. Like, it's the rules are going to be new. You know, mental health is an everybody issue. It's an everybody issue, and the sooner we get to that place. I said in Storm Lake, I said in Iowa Falls, I say everywhere I go speak, cocaine, opioids, caffeine. This is for the adults in here. Caffeine, look in your coffee mug. Anxiety, sleep deprivation. Cell phones, video games, sleep deprivation. It's all tied up, and it's an everybody issue, but there will be those outliers that could actually manifest symptoms bad enough to walk into school and you'd be able to identify them on that clinical criteria. But that doesn't mean there's not a vast amount of kids in the school that are adversely affected by the same or similar issues that will never get the help which is the aim, right? The aim isn't to help the outlier kid who's just severely stricken, although we need to help him too. But what about the 9 out of 10 that are invisible to us? As educators and as adults, that needs to be in our lens. So.
Okay, I'm going to do one more because I know some people want to get a chance to talk to Royce too, so I want to make sure we have time for that.
All right, well, maybe I'll end on a light note here. I want to say thank you so much for opening up and for your vulnerability and courage. It's really inspiring.
So much. Thank you.
So being a fellow Minnesotan, I have a really, really important question for you.
There you go.
Minneapolis or St. Paul?
Wow. That's the toughest question all night, for sure. Wow. I'm gonna be Switzerland on that one.
Oh, okay.
So I was born and raised in St. Paul, and I have a very lofty family history in St. Paul, generations. Not only in St. Paul, but in West St. Paul on the west side. My Mexican family was one of the first to settle on the west side from Mexico. So St. Paul is near and dear to my heart. And if you know St. Paul has character.
Right. I was going to choose St. Paul too. So.
It has character.
Yep.
But I played a lot of sports in Minneapolis. My mother worked in Edina, which is a small suburb for those you don't know. We have all these small suburbs in the Twin Cities. It's like there's 15 suburbs around Minneapolis, and we just call it Minneapolis. But if you really looked, it's like, no, that's its own city. So that's kind of how we're built. But, I'm split. Okay. I love both of them. I'm very, very Twin City avid.
All right, well, thank you. Let's give Royce another round of applause. He has been very generous with his time and communication with us in doing this, and said he'd be more than happy to stick around to chat or take a picture, or as Mark said, with an autograph. I want to point out two things. Make It Okay was an organization that came with us out of Minnesota as well, and I hope you had a chance to see their display down at the Science Center about stigma and just kind of entering the experience for people that are dealing with issues. But the other thing I have that I want to point out, if you didn't get a chance to, if you didn't register for tonight, and if you'd like to become a part of this movement, really, we've got these little green sheets. You don't need to do one of these. All it's really going to do is get you to get our newsletter. But it also has some stuff about ideas for a future speaker. I'd like to think of this as the beginning of something for us in partnering with other organizations in the community to talk about these issues. We want to play a role in that, not only on the side of the practice of walking with people as they come to us and seeking help, but also in terms of that advocacy component. If you'd like to be a part of that, I'd encourage you to fill one of those out and make sure you leave it at the table out there. That's the only commitment you're going to get to it, is you're going to get our newsletter for future events that are going to happen. And then if you have any ideas about somebody you think would be great, as Royce was great tonight, then you can write that down as well. Okay. So thank you for being here. You can spend some time together. Thank you for being generous with your time. Thank you for being a good brother and showing up and being a good companion too. So one last round of applause, and thank you for coming tonight.